Have you noticed that sealed VHS tapes have been going crazy lately? Did you see that Goldin Auctions just sold one for over $57,000? That's nuts! A year ago, nobody heard of this hobby. What the hell is going on? Stick around to find out.
Mad Dog Earl.
VHS. If you were alive in the 1980s or 90s, then you grew up on them. We all remember going to our local video store and perusing the aisles in a sea of VHS box covers. That's what it was all about back then. But VHS has been obsolete for almost 20 years. Do you even own a VCR anymore? Don't lie. It felt as though these ancient bricks of media had been lost to time itself. But in 2021, they came back, and sealed VHS tapes quickly became the hottest new collectible hobby. But in just a short 6-month time span from March until September 2021, prices rose as much as 5 to 20 times as sealed video game collectors rushed into the hobby. Now, this might sound like an unsustainable and unhealthy level of growth in such a short period of time. I get that for sure. But you have to realize, prior to 2021, people didn't even know that sealed VHS existed. This was simply the market playing catch up. And nobody understands this type of collectible, I'm talking about sealed media, better than the video game collectors. And they nailed it with sealed video games. If I were you, I wouldn't doubt them again this time. So where do we begin? Okay, I'll tell you what. The best place to look to understand what's happening right now in sealed VHS is to examine the rise of sealed video games as a collectible hobby. Now, back in 2011, I was fortunate enough to randomly come across sealed NES games on eBay. Now, being a collector my whole life and somebody who grew up on Nintendo, I was instantly blown away. You see, how is it even possible that these things exist in sealed mint condition? It makes no sense. How is it possible that somebody in the 1980s went to the store and bought a game for $30, $40, or $50 and didn't open it? It makes no sense. These people would be considered clinically insane at the time. Nobody thought of these as a potentially valuable collectible. I can tell you that for sure. So in those early days, I bought a ton of sealed video games from old school dealers like Rare Bucky. My first major purchase was this copy of The Legend of Zelda for the NES. It's a round seal Rev A copy. In 2013, I paid $1,700 for this game. And at the time, the people around me thought that I was crazy. But I saw it. Video games are the comic books of our generation. If you were a kid in the 1980s or 90s, I guarantee that you remember going to your local video store and seeing the wall of games. This is what being a kid back then was all about. And that is exactly why we collect sealed video games. I think it's worth noting that back in 2012, when I first started collecting sealed video games, a lot of the original game collectors, the guys that had already been in it for 10 plus years at the time, they were dumping all over these new sealed collectors that were entering their hobby. They hated the thought of grading games, and they hated the thought of even keeping the game sealed, with their motto being the games are meant to be played, as though they can't find one of millions of copies that are out in the wild that have already been opened. And they especially made fun of the people that went after the most popular titles like Mario and Zelda. I can tell you that am I ever glad that I wasn't collecting to impress them at the time, because I would have been left behind in the dust. You're likely to be met with a similar resistance in sealed VHS. I don't blame the old guard for this. They prefer the hobby the way it used to be before all these new sealed collectors came along. But these original collectors have been preserving, researching, and documenting the history of VHS for a long time. And for that, they deserve a ton of respect. Just check out VHScollector.com to see some of this hard work. It's truly amazing. And it's a great tool. Now, sealed video games didn't just explode into popularity overnight. It was a bit of a choppy ride to get there. Back then, the only auction platform to buy sealed video games was eBay, and it was overrun with fake listings and shill bids and shenanigans, reseals and fakes. And there was only one grading company available at the time, VGA, and they left something to be desired for the new collectors who are used to the 10-point grading scale that you see in comic books and in trading cards. There was little growth in video games between 2012 and 2015 as the market sat in limbo and buyer confidence waned. The collecting community was waiting for somebody to step up. Enter WATA Games in 2018. They were the perfect grading company for video games, and they introduced the 10-point grading scale just like in comic books. And Heritage Auctions, the world's leading collectibles auctioneer and the world's leading seller of CGC graded comic books, immediately bought into their vision for the future of sealed video games, recognizing that they now have the true potential to be elevated to the level of comic books. And they established their first ever video game division in a major auction house, and they had their first ever video game auction in January of 2019. Everything was falling into place. By November of 2019, another 9.0 copy of the Round Seal Legend of Zelda, same one I paid $1,700 for in 2013, came up at Heritage Auctions, where it sold for the then spectacular price of $19,200. Now, this was far beyond expectations at the time, especially because Nerdy Girl Comics, Danielle, had at the same time a similarly graded VGA 85 copy of the Round Seal Legend of Zelda for $9,900. Buy it now. But as crazy as everything was, many knew, myself included, that this was just the beginning. These things are so incredibly rare and so important, they have to be worth more. It was around that November 2019 auction that FOMO, the fear of missing out, started setting in, and things started to get crazy. And as a side note, I ended up buying Danielle's copy of The Legend of Zelda shortly after that auction. Thanks, Danielle. Values on sealed video games continued to rise at a rapid rate, with each subsequent major auction through 2020, no doubt accelerated by the pandemic, and into 2021. In September 2021, a third copy of The Legend of Zelda Reveille 9.0, in slightly lesser grade than mine, came up at Goldin Auctions, where it sold for $228,000. That's over 130 times what I paid for my copy some 8 years prior. According to the latest WATA population reports, they've only graded 33 copies of the Zelda Reveille Round Seal in any grade, total. Sealed video games have made it as a serious and valuable collectible. At these levels, when the big money started entering the hobby, a lot of the collectors from years past were simply priced out of the market. And in around March and April 2021, a few of them discovered on eBay sealed VHS tapes. And when they started posting their discoveries on Instagram to a small network of sealed video game collectors, the market exploded. By now, you're probably wondering, why the hell is he talking so much about sealed video games? What makes sealed video games so much like sealed VHS? Video games, home video. They're the two leading forms of home entertainment. Both are consumed by using your television. Both rose to mass popularity in the 1980s. Both are home media that come factory sealed with shrink wrap around a box. Both were never meant to be collected. Heck, video games are just one aisle over from the VHS tapes at your Blockbuster. You get my point. They're very alike. So are sealed VHS really going to be the next big thing? Well, I can personally tell you that I haven't felt such a feeling of pending greatness of an underappreciated item that's worth so much more than where it's at today than when I first discovered sealed video games back in 2012. This may sound crazy to a lot of people, but why is it that when these same people hear of a 15-cent comic book like Amazing Fantasy 15 sell for $3.6 million, it doesn't really surprise them? Well, it's because comic books have long been established as a valuable collectible. So that brings the question, what makes a collectible valuable? Well, it's generally a function of importance in popular culture, rarity, and I'll throw as point 3, aesthetics into the mix because it should look cool and it definitely helps if it screams that you have to own it. To illustrate this, let's take one last look at a sealed video game. Super Mario World for the SNES. So, what makes this game valuable? Well, 1, importance in popular culture. This game literally defined my generation's childhood. I can tell you personally that one of my most vivid memories in popular culture is standing in the Superstore electronics department as a kid in front of that wall of games. The clerk had just opened up the glass showcase and pulled out a brand new Super Nintendo Entertainment System that contained this game as a pack-in and handed it to my 7-year-old self. I can tell you that that image is ingrained in my brain for life, and that was a game changer. Plus, this is widely rated as one of the best video games of all time, and Mario is just as relevant as a franchise today than it ever was. In fact, it's now over a $30 billion franchise. And this game is really rare. In fact, even back in 2012, this game literally never came up. It took me over 7 years to finally find my first copy of Super Mario World. We don't have WATA population reports yet, but I imagine there can't be more than 50 graded copies of this iconic game. And when you think about it, for something so important that so many people have to have, that is so rare. And tying aesthetics into it, this game just displays beautifully. Look at that cover art. It is just so iconic, and this thing looks amazing on your shelf. And when you tie in the WATA case, which looks equally as cool, this thing is a must-have. Okay, enough of those other collectibles. We're here to talk about sealed VHS. And so the question is, does sealed VHS have what it takes to be a valuable collectible? Well, factor 1, importance in popular culture. If you were alive during the 1980s or 90s, then you remember going to the video rental store. This was a ritual that was embedded in American life. In 1990, the average American rented a movie from the video store at least once per month. That is an insane number, and it's hard to believe that that whole culture, which was so ingrained in our society, has completely disappeared. We all have fond video store memories. It wasn't a hassle to get in your car and drive to the video store. It was a shared community experience. Your local video store's inventory of movies was curated for everybody in your community. This broadened our horizons. The video store is a lost piece of America, and it was true Americana. Sealed VHS as a collectible perfectly encapsulate that great video store era. And there are so many genres and so many great movies. There's truly something for everyone. Whether you're into movies that were filmed in the 1980s or movies from the 1990s like The Mask, Men in Black, or Happy Gilmore, or whether you're into the classics, I can tell you there is a ton of classic movies on VHS. Or your favorite movies of all time, or even classic WWF. I can tell you this is one of my favorites. These tapes are absolutely awesome. Or even your favorite cartoons. There is so much to choose from. Just think of the cultural impact of films like Jurassic Park, RoboCop, Batman. When these films were released, it was a big deal. And sealed VHS is the only way to collect these great films that we love so much as a graded collectible.
The Music Plus chain, they're shipping 50,000 Batman tapes. Now, whether that'll be enough to carry them through, who knows?
Now that we've established the importance in popular culture, let's take a look at factor 2, rarity. Now, most people associate VHS with those bargain bins that we remember from the 2000s at the end of the VHS life cycle, where you could buy an armful of VHS tapes for $5 to $10 and bring them home and never watch them. But that certainly was not the case in the 1980s. This is a first print Back to the Future. When it was released on May 22nd in 1986, it carried a retail price of $79.95. Compare that to when Super Mario Bros. Came out just a few months prior, and it had a retail price of just $25. As you can see, these VHS tapes were extremely expensive at the time. In the 1980s, almost all first print VHS tapes carried a staggering retail. This was a strategy adopted by the distributors to promote the rental market. And so it begs the question, who in their right mind would have bought this tape in 1986 for $79.95 and not opened it? VHS was the dominant form of media for over 15 years after this film's release. Is it possible that Back to the Future sat on the shelf of somebody who wanted it bad enough to spend $80 for it at the time of release for over 15 years and they never once had the urge to even watch it? No! And the first print run of Back to the Future was a sellout. There's no reason why any store should have been left with any excess inventory. And even if they were, they could have easily sold that inventory off in the subsequent print runs in 1989, 1994. My point is, these things are rare. And for the third factor, aesthetics, take one look at this cover. It is absolutely beautiful. It had to be. You see, there was stiff competition back in the rental market, with customers navigating a sea of thousands of video box covers. The cover art had to stand out. These covers are perfectly designed to hook in the targeted audience of the era. In many ways, these things are like a time capsule. So if you add the three factors of what make a collectible valuable together and apply them to sealed VHS tapes, it's obvious. Sealed VHS tapes are a valuable collectible. Here's another cool one. A factory sealed copy of Halloween 2. The horror section at the video store, especially for a kid under 10, was like a forbidden jewel. You knew that you weren't going to rent any of the films down that aisle, not just because you weren't allowed, but also because you knew you didn't have the nerve to watch it even if you were allowed. But you still worked up the courage to walk down that aisle, and you couldn't help but gaze at those terrifying covers. This is one of those memorable covers that'll be ingrained in my brain for life. I remember countless times seeing this cover in the horror aisle. It was terrifying, but I couldn't take my eyes off of it. Its design is so simple and so unique. I never did rent this film, not even once, but this cover will be ingrained and burned into my retinas for life. Now, the sealed VHS hobby is still in its infancy, but we already have 3 established grading companies. Those are VHSDNA, IGS, and VGA. All 3 of these companies just started grading sealed VHS within the last 12 months, so it's a little early to tell. But will one of these companies be the one to bring sealed VHS to the promised land? Only time will tell. And with Heritage Auctions having just announced that they're adding a sealed VHS division to their auctions, this is starting to feel a lot like video games did back in January of 2019. This is just the beginning. Are you in for the ride? Thanks for watching.